The wind rolled through Dust Creek like a tired ghost, dragging ribbons of red dust across the empty street. The sun was sinking low, painting the wooden fronts of the town in copper light. Inside the rusted spur, the evening crowd murmured softly, miners, drifters, and a few ranch hands escaping another day's labor. Behind the bar, Elias Boone wiped a glass until it caught the last of that dying sunlight. He did this every night, slow and steady, as if polishing something sacred. His movements were quiet, his presence quieter still, but there was a weight in his silence that kept even the drunkest men from crossing him. He was a broad man with gray in his beard and calloused hands that didn't belong to a simple bartender. His knuckles looked like they remembered anvils, not bottles. Yet no one ever asked. Folks in Dust Creek didn't pry. Everyone here had run from something, past sins, lost loves, broken dreams, and Elias was no different. His eyes held the faraway gleam of a man who'd once seen too much fire. The piano in the corner played a lazy tune, something cheerful that couldn't quite reach the corners of the room. The scent of whiskey and old wood hung in the air. Outside, cicadas sang from the sagebrush. It was an ordinary night in a town that barely held itself together. Then came the thunder, not from a sky, hooves. 5 riders tore through the street like a storm. Their dust swallowed the sunset. The Red Crows. Everyone in the county knew their mark. Red bandanas, black coats, and eyes mean as winter. Calder Vane led them, tall and lean with a cruel smile carved deep into his face. He'd killed men for less than being stared at, and his name rode ahead of him like the scent of smoke before a fire. Doors shut. Curtains fell. The piano stopped mid-note. Only Elias kept moving, wiping that same glass, his shoulders broad and unshaken as the gang dismounted outside. Calder pushed open the saloon doors, the hinges creaking in protest. "Well, I'll be damned," Calder drawled, stepping into the light. Didn't think Dust Creek still had a place worth drinking. Elias didn't look up. "Whiskey's the same everywhere," he said softly. Calder grinned, showing a gold tooth. "Then pour us around. We've had a long ride." Elias reached for a bottle, the glass glinting in lamplight. He poured 5 shots, slow and even, not spilling a drop. Calder's men watched him like wolves waiting to see if the lamb would run. Calder raised his glass. "To good whiskey and weak men." Elias met his eyes for the first time. "Drink it or don't, but you'll pay like everyone else." The words hung in the air, sharp as a knife. One of the outlaws laughed, then stopped when Calder's smile faded. "Now, that don't sound friendly," Calder said. "You know who we are, barkeep?" Elias leaned forward, bracing his hands on the counter. His voice was calm, low, steady as an anvil strike. "I know the kind. Always talking about who they are." Calder's smile turned cold. He tossed his whiskey to the floor. The liquid splashed against the wood and spread like a stain. "You sure you want to test that kind tonight?" Elias didn't blink. Whiskey's wasted on men who don't respect it. For a long moment, no one breathed. The piano man slipped out the back, boots barely making a sound. The rest of the room emptied until it was just Elias, Calder, and the Red Crows. Calder's eyes glimmered with amusement. "You got some iron in you, old man." Elias's gaze didn't waver. "Used to." The word stirred something in Calder's memory, a flicker of recognition he couldn't place. He shook it off, spat to the side, and snapped his fingers. "Burn it." 2 of his men kicked over lanterns. Oil splattered. The flames licked up the walls like hungry snakes. Bottles burst, glass shattered, and in seconds the saloon became a roaring furnace. Elias didn't move. He stood behind the bar, framed in firelight, watching everything he'd built for 5 long years turn to ash. Calder walked out laughing, his boots crunching glass. "Next time, old man, remember your manners." The Red Crows rode into the night, their laughter fading with the wind. Elias stepped into the street as the saloon groaned and collapsed behind him. Sparks drifted into the starless sky. Townsfolk peeked from doorways, faces pale and frightened. He said nothing. His shirt was black with soot, his hair silver in the firelight. Sheriff Doolin hurried over, hat in hand. "Boone, I'm sorry. There wasn't nothing we could do. Those devils." Elias cut him off with a look, not angry, just final. Ain't your fault, Sheriff. Still, you can't stay here tonight. My place has a spare cot. Elias shook his head. I got somewhere. He walked down the road toward his barn, boots sinking in dust, smoke trailing behind him like a shadow. Inside the barn, the air smelled of hay and old iron. He lit a lantern and crouched near the far wall, brushing away dirt until his hand touched cold metal. A trapdoor. Beneath it, stairs led down into darkness. He hadn't been down there in years. The steps creaked beneath his boots as he descended. The air grew cooler, heavier. When he lit another lantern, the flame revealed a room lined with tools, tongs, hammers, molds, and an anvil scarred by decades of work. A forge, dormant but not dead. Dust lay thick over everything, yet the place felt alive, waiting. He ran his hand along the edge of the anvil. His fingers traced old scratches, marks from battles long finished. He remembered the heat, the ringing sound of metal yielding to will, the smell of coal and sweat. Once, this forge had been his kingdom. Once, men had ridden for miles away to beg for the weapons he made. They called him Iron Hand Boone, the finest blacksmith in 3 territories, until the day his rifles were used to slaughter a town he'd never seen. He'd left that life behind, or so he thought. Now, staring at the ashes still glowing in the distance through the barn window, he felt the old ache return. Not anger exactly, but something deeper, heavier. Justice, maybe. Or guilt. He sat beside the anvil and drew a small metal box from beneath a pile of rags. Inside lay a revolver, wrapped in oilcloth, the bluing still perfect. His initials were carved faintly on the grip, E.B. He turned it over in his hand, feeling its weight, its memory. Then he set it back down. Not yet. Above ground, the wind moaned through the ruins of the rusted spur. The smell of smoke settled into the bones of the town. Martha Caro, who owned the general store, found him at sunrise, standing by what was left of his saloon. Nothing but char and silence. Elias, she began softly, her voice trembling. I'm sorry. You can rebuild. I'll help. He looked at her, eyes rimmed red from sleeplessness, but steady as ever. No rebuildin'. Not this time. You can't just let them. I ain't letting him, he said, and the tone in his voice made her fall silent. The sun rose over Dust Creek, washing the street in gold. Smoke curled lazily from the ruins, and the ashes gleamed like iron dust. Elias knelt, brushed his fingers through them, and lifted a small, burned piece of the saloon sign, the R from Rusted Spur. He buried it gently in the dirt, pressing the soil flat with his palm. Then he stood, the wind whipping his coat. From where he stood, the horizon looked endless, the canyons far and waiting. Somewhere out there, the Red Crows rode, thinking they'd silenced an old man. The days that followed were silent except for the wind. Dust Creek had gone still, its streets empty, the air heavy with the ghost of smoke. Where the Rusted Spur once stood, only charred timbers and glass fragments caught the sun. Elias Boone stood in the ruins, coat collar turned up, eyes fixed on the ground as though something sacred lay buried beneath the ashes. He knelt, fingers sifting through the gray powder, lifting a half-melted horseshoe from the rubble. The metal had bent but not broken. Still strong, he murmured, the words meant for no one but himself. Behind him, the horizon shimmered with heat. The town carried on in whispers. People passed him with quick glances and quicker steps. No one spoke to him now. He was the man whose saloon had burned, the man who had stared at the flames without blinking. That night, after the sun slid away and the coyotes began their chorus, Elias returned to his barn. The lantern light threw a thin glow across the beams, revealing dust thick enough to write a name in. He set the lamp on the workbench, knelt by the far wall, and pulled aside a loose board. Beneath it lay the trapdoor he had opened once before. The hinges groaned as he lifted it. The smell that rose up was old earth and rust. He descended slowly, each wooden step creaking under his weight. The air below was cold, close, and filled with memory. The forge waited. His old tools, hammers, tongs, molds, sat in their places like loyal dogs waiting for a master's call. He touched the anvil, and a faint film of rust came away on his hand. It was still solid, still ready. He remembered when this room had been alive, when the roar of the furnace drowned out the world above, when sparks flew like fireflies in a summer storm. Men had come from towns hundreds of miles away to see him work. Soldiers, bounty hunters, lawmen, all chasing the same thing, weapons born from his hands. He'd given them what they asked for. He shut his eyes, and the memories came hard. The clang of iron, the heat on his skin, the smell of hot steel and sweat. Then the noise of gunfire, real gunfire, echoing across the valley months later. He had forged rifles for a militia that claimed to defend settlers. They'd used them to massacre a native village instead. Women, children, gone in one morning. When word reached him, he'd smashed his anvil, buried his tools, and swore never to make another weapon again. Until now. He fed coal into the furnace and struck a match. The first flame flickered weakly, then caught, breathing life into the black pit. Orange light spilled across the room. Shadows danced up the stone walls. He watched the fire grow, his reflection glowing in it like a man being remade. When the metal turned red in the heat, he raised his hammer. The first strike sent a sharp note, singing through the chamber. Then another, and another, each blow rhythmic, relentless. The sound filled the dark, echoing through the barn floorboards, carried by the night air like a beating heart. Every strike seemed to pull something out of him. The grief, the rage, the helplessness. Sparks rained around him, painting his arms in gold. His face was calm, but his eyes burned with purpose. He wasn't forging for profit now. He was forging for truth. Hours passed unnoticed. Outside, the night deepened, and stars began to fade into dawn. When the last ember died, Elias set the hammer down and sat back, breath steady, hands trembling slightly. On the anvil lay the barrel of a revolver, rough but alive. It gleamed faintly, almost as if remembering what it once was. A soft knock startled him. He climbed the steps and opened the barn door to find Martha Caro standing there with a covered dish. The early light touched her face, showing worry etched in the corners of her eyes. "You haven't been by the store," she said, glancing past him into the barn. "Folks are talking. They say the Red Crows have taken over Doolin's office. They're running Dust Creek now." Elias looked at her, saying nothing. His hands were still black with soot, the smell of metal clinging to his shirt. "I brought stew," she added, holding out the dish. "You've got to eat, Elias. You can't fight fire with an empty stomach." He took the dish gently, nodded his thanks. "You should stay inside. Don't deal with them. Don't pay him. Don't talk to him." She hesitated. "You think they'll leave us be?" "No," he said simply. "But they won't stay long." Her eyes searched his, but whatever she saw there made her step back. "You look different," she whispered. "Just tired." She nodded, though she didn't believe it. "You be careful." When she was gone, Elias stood in the open doorway, watching her silhouette shrink into the dust. The morning sun was bright but harsh. It burned the fields gold, making the desert look alive again. But beneath that beauty, everything felt ready to break. He ate a few spoonfuls of the stew, then set it aside and went back down to the forge. The fire still glowed softly. He picked up the revolver barrel, now cooled, and began reassembling the weapon piece by piece. Grip, trigger, cylinder, sight. It was an old design, his own creation, once known across the territories as the Widowmaker, a name that had followed him like a curse. He hadn't touched it in 15 years. He oiled the parts, tested the cylinder's spin. It clicked smoothly, precise as clockwork. His craftsmanship hadn't dulled. His hands still remembered. The past never really left. It just hid until the world forced it awake again. He worked until twilight, stopping only to light another lantern. Outside, the sky burned red with sunset, clouds glowing like smelted iron. The air smelled of rain far off, though Dust Creek hadn't seen rain in months. When the revolver was finished, he set it on the anvil. It looked like something carved from shadow and fire, every edge exact, every surface smooth. He loaded 6 bullets into the cylinder, each one polished, deliberate. Then he closed it with a click that echoed through the quiet forge. He holstered it under his coat. The weight felt right, familiar. Not comforting, just inevitable. He climbed the ladder out of the cellar as the first stars appeared. The world outside had gone still again. In the distance, faint campfires flickered near the ridge, outlaws keeping watch. Their laughter carried on the wind. Elias stood in the open yard, lantern in hand, the smell of smoke still hanging from the ruins behind him. He looked once more at the ashes of the rusted spur. The memories were gone now, scattered in the dirt. What remained was something harder, sharper. He blew out the lantern. Darkness took hold, and the moon rose white and full above the canyons. Its light silvered the desert, turning every shadow into a shape, every silence into a promise. He walked away from the barn, his boots sinking into the cool sand. Each step sounded final, like a drumbeat leading him toward something he could no longer turn from. The forge behind him hissed as the last ember died, sending a thin trail of smoke curling into the sky. He didn't look back. The wind lifted the hem of his coat and whispered through the sagebrush, carrying with it the scent of iron and dust. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled. Elias Boone, Iron Hand Boone once more, kept walking into the desert until the town disappeared behind him, swallowed by the dark. The desert was a vast and merciless place, its silence broken only by the sigh of the wind through the canyons. Elias Boone moved through it like a shadow, each step measured, each breath slow and deliberate. The moon hung low, pale and watchful, bathing the rocks and sand in ghostly silver. Far ahead, faint lights flickered along the ridge of Devil's Bluff, the campfires of the Red Crows. He crouched among the sagebrush, eyes fixed on those fires. He counted the silhouettes, 5, maybe 6 men left. The rest were already gone. He had taken them over the past 2 nights, one by one, quiet as rust spreading through steel. A snare made from braided wire had caught one's horse and thrown him down the ravine. Another had found his rifle jammed with sand, the trigger useless when he needed it most. By the time the others noticed, the fear had begun to spread like wildfire through their ranks. Now only the heart of the gang remained, holed up in the rocks overlooking the trade road, guarding their spoils and their pride. Calder Vane was there too, Elias knew. The man had been laughing that night as the saloon burned, his boots glinting with flame. Elias had memorized that sound. He had come to silence it. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a horseshoe he'd reshaped in the forge. The metal gleamed faintly under the moonlight, its curve perfect, edges sharpened. He set it along a path near the ridge, fastening it with a thin line of wire that blended into the sand. A trap meant not for beasts, but for the kind of men who'd forgotten what pain felt like. He moved on, careful not to disturb the stones. In his pocket was a small iron brand shaped like a crow, its beak open as if screaming. He'd made it that afternoon, heating it in the forge until the metal turned white-hot. Now, every time he left a body behind, he pressed that mark into the sand beside it, the sign of their own gang, turned against them. The night deepened. A coyote howled somewhere to the west. The Red Crow's campfire popped and cracked, the glow bouncing off the canyon walls. Elias crept closer, his boots whispering through the dust. He could see their faces now, hard, tired, and nervous. One man stood apart, keeping watch with a rifle slung over his shoulder. Elias studied the man's posture, waited for him to turn, then struck. A flash of movement, a hand clamped over the outlaw's mouth, a short struggle in the dark, then silence. When the body slumped to the ground, Elias dragged it behind a boulder and covered it with loose sand. He breathed slow, steady. His pulse didn't quicken. This wasn't vengeance born from rage anymore. It was work, precise and deliberate, the kind only a craftsman could understand. The camp began to stir. A second man stepped out from the circle of firelight, calling into the dark. "Reed, you done taking a piss or what?" Elias watched him wander closer, the barrel of his gun swinging lazily. When the outlaw's boot caught the snare, the horseshoe snapped tight around his ankle. He screamed once before Elias pulled him down, hand pressed to his throat until the noise stopped. The others leapt to their feet, drawing weapons. Chaos spread through the camp, men shouting, lanterns swinging wildly. Elias fired once, a single shot that shattered the nearest lamp. Darkness swallowed them. They fired blindly into the shadows. Sparks danced off the rocks. The echoes of gunfire bounced back, confusing them. Elias moved among the sound, swift and invisible, his revolver an extension of his heartbeat. When one man ran for the horses, Elias struck him from behind with the butt of his gun, the sound dull and final. When it was over, only two remained near the dying fire, Calder Vane and his right-hand man. The younger outlaw's hand shook as he tried to reload, but Calder was still a stone, his face hard as hammered steel. "Boone," he shouted into the canyon, "I know it's you. Come out and show that iron face of yours." Elias stepped from the shadows, revolver in one hand, a small iron hammer in the other. The firelight painted him in bronze and red, his eyes calm, expression unreadable. Calder's grin returned, wide and venomous. "I'll be damned." The barkeep himself. He laughed once, low and cruel. "You think one old man's gonna take down the Red Crows?" Elias's voice was quiet, steady as the wind. "Already did." Calder's smile faltered. He looked around, seeing the bodies sprawled among the rocks, the half-buried shapes in the sand, the black crow marks burned beside them. His right-hand man panicked and raised his gun, but before he could fire, Elias's revolver barked once. The man spun and fell backward, dead before he hit the ground. Now it was just the two of them. The air between them felt charged, thick with smoke and memory. Calder drew his pistol slowly, watching Elias the way a snake watches a boot. "You could have walked away, old man. Built yourself another saloon somewhere quiet." Elias took a single step forward. "You burned the only quiet I ever had." Calder tilted his head, almost amused. "You ain't no lawman. You're just a barkeep with a grudge." "No," Elias said. "I'm the man who built the guns that ended legends." The words hung heavy, the kind that didn't need explaining. Calder blinked, realizing too late what that meant. The first shot came quick. Calder fired, and the bullet tore through Elias's sleeve, grazing skin. The second shot came slower, deliberate Elias's. It struck Calder's gun, shattering the cylinder. The weapon flew from his hand, clattering against the rocks. Calder staggered back, eyes wide. Elias advanced, each step echoing like a hammer on an anvil. "I forged that model," he said, nodding at the broken gun. "Ain't it something, seeing your own work fail?" Calder lunged, drawing a knife from his belt, but Elias caught his wrist mid-swing. They struggled, boots grinding against stone, muscles straining. The knife flashed once, slicing across Elias's shoulder, but he didn't flinch. He drove his fist into Calder's ribs, then swung the iron hammer up from his belt and brought it down hard. The sound cracked through the night, a single brutal note. Calder fell to his knees, blood on his lips, eyes full of disbelief. He tried to speak, but only air came out. Elias stood over him, breathing heavily, the hammer slick in his grip. Calder's gaze shifted to the weapon, recognition dawning. That's mine." Elias nodded once. "You ordered it years ago. Said you wanted something that could build or break a man." "Yes, it did both." He dropped the hammer beside Calder's body and turned away. The outlaw collapsed into the sand, the life leaving him with one last exhale. The canyon was quiet again. Smoke from the dying fire rose into the starlit sky. Elias holstered his revolver, walked to the edge of the bluff, and looked down at the desert below. The horizon was beginning to pale with dawn, the first light washing the rocks in soft gold. He reached into his coat and pulled out the small iron brand. He knelt and pressed it into the sand beside Calder's body. When he lifted it away, the mark of the red crow smoldered faintly, red as blood in the half-light. Then he stood and walked down the slope, boots crunching over stone and ash. The rising sun stretched his shadow long across the canyon floor, making him look taller than any man alive. Behind him, Devil's Bluff fell silent, save for the whisper of wind over cooling iron, a sound like a forge finally gone cold. Morning broke slow over Dust Creek, the kind of quiet dawn that felt like the world was holding its breath. A faint breeze stirred the ashes of old fires, and sunlight spilled over the ridge in a soft, forgiving gold. The town stirred later than usual, its people stepping out of their doors one by one, blinking against the light. They had all heard something in the night, distant gunfire echoing from the canyons, like thunder from another world. But now there was only silence, Sheriff Doolin rode in from the North Trail, just past sunrise, his horse lathered and tired. He'd found them, the Red Crows, scattered across Devil's Bluff, dead among their own campfires. No one could say how it happened, or who had done it. Some claimed the law finally caught up. Others whispered it was something older, something born of the desert itself. But those who'd seen Elias Boone's eyes in the weeks prior said nothing. They already knew. By midday, word spread through every corner of town. The outlaws were gone. The fear that had hung over Dust Creek like smoke was gone with them. The townsfolk didn't celebrate, not loudly. They spoke in low tones, grateful but uneasy, as though the desert had simply balanced a debt that was owed. And on the edge of town, the ruins of the rusted spur stirred with the sound of hammers once more. Elias stood where his bar had been, shirt sleeves rolled, the muscles in his arms moving with slow, practiced rhythm. The saloon's front wall had been rebuilt from old boards salvaged from barns and wagons, but instead of whiskey bottles, his shelves now held metal tools, nails, and horseshoes. The forge burned in the corner, its glow steady, its smoke curling up through a hole in the roof. The smell of coal and iron replaced the old scent of bourbon and pine. He worked quietly, shaping a horseshoe on the anvil. The ring of his hammer echoed across the yard, clean, measured, alive. Each strike seemed to rebuild more than the structure before him. It rebuilt the man himself. The townsfolk began to come by, one at a time. First a farmer needing a new plow blade, then a rancher whose horse had thrown a shoe. They paid in what they could, eggs, tools, a little money, but most offered respect more than anything else. They didn't ask about Devil's Bluff. They didn't have to. By late afternoon, Martha Caro appeared at the doorway. She stood there for a moment, watching him work, her face lit by the forge's red light. "You turned a saloon into a smithy," she said with a small smile. "Didn't think I'd live to see that." Elias set the hammer down, wiping his hands on a rag. "Whiskey's gone out of style," he said, his voice softer now, carrying a hint of dry humor. She stepped inside, looking around the rebuilt walls. "The town's been talking," she said. "They're calling you something new." He raised an eyebrow. "I can guess it ain't flattering." She smiled, shaking her head. "The Iron Bartender." He chuckled quietly, a sound that hadn't escaped him in years. "Could be worse." "You're working again," she said. "That's good. You look lighter." Elias looked down at his hands, hands that once forged death, now shaping life again. "Feels right," he said. "Metal don't lie to you. It tells you when it's ready, when it's strong, when it's not." Martha's eyes softened. "You never really left it, did you?" He glanced at the forge, watching the coals pulse with heat. "You can walk away from a fire," he said quietly, "but the smell stays with you." They shared a long silence. The sound of the hammer returned, steady and sure. Martha stood watching him a while longer before setting down a wrapped loaf of bread. "For supper," she said. "Thank you," he replied. When she was gone, the workshop grew still again. The sun began to sink low over the mesas, and the sky turned copper and rose, the same color as molten steel. Elias finished his work, setting the cooled horseshoes in neat rows on the bench. Then he turned toward the small shelf at the back of the room, a shelf that had survived the fire, though scorched and cracked. On it sat a single bottle of whiskey, half full, untouched since the night before the fire. The glass caught the last of the daylight, glowing amber like liquid sunset. Elias reached for it. His fingers lingered on the glass, then pulled it down. He poured a single measure into a clean tumbler, clear, steady, no shaking in his hand. The smell filled the air, sweet and sharp. He walked outside with the glass, the evening wind tugging gently at his shirt. The town below was quiet again, lights flickering on one by one. Beyond it stretched the open desert, endless and golden beneath the setting sun. The smoke from his forge curled into the sky like a prayer. He raised the glass toward the horizon. His eyes were steady, but there was a flicker of something behind them. Remembrance, maybe peace, maybe both. "You can burn wood," he said softly, voice rough as gravel, "not iron." He drank slowly, letting the warmth roll through him. The words lingered in the cooling air. For a moment he thought he saw her again, The woman who used to play the piano in the rusted spur before it burned, her laughter echoing through the halls. He thought he heard the clinking of glasses, the hum of conversation, the music of a place that once was home. Then it faded, leaving only the creak of the windmill and the hum of the forge. He turned back inside, setting the glass on the workbench beside the anvil. The last light from the setting sun caught the metal, turning it to gold. He ran his hand along its edge one final time, then extinguished the fire. The forge hissed, sending up a brief plume of smoke that drifted toward the rafters like a departing soul. Outside, the town settled into night. Somewhere a dog barked and a baby cried, small sounds of life that meant things were normal again. Dust Creek had found its balance. Elias stepped out onto the porch, leaning against a post, watching the stars prick through the velvet dark. His reflection shimmered faintly in the window beside him. A tired man, yes, but no longer haunted. In the distance, the desert stretched wide and endless, the same land that had taken everything from him and somehow given him something back. And somewhere deep inside that vast silence, the narrator's voice, timeless, slow, as if born of wind and fire, seemed to rise. Some men are born to forge tools, some weapons, but every so often, the world shapes one who forges justice. Elias Boone, the iron bartender of Dust Creek, stood in the glow of his rebuilt forge as the stars burned bright above him, steady, unyielding, eternal as iron.